My wife won $9 million in the state lottery on Tuesday night. She filed for divorce Wednesday morning. By Thursday, her parents were explaining, very calmly, that a 32-year-old sports store manager making $45,000 a year was never meant to touch that kind of money. They said it like it was obvious, like marriage had an income cap. I'd been married to their daughter for 5 years. I paid the bills, I kept the lights on. I covered the mortgage when her income fell short. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that $9 million had appeared, and suddenly I was a liability that needed to be removed before I could contaminate their family's future. They reminded me of the prenuptial agreement they'd insisted I sign before the wedding. The one they said was standard, the one their lawyer drafted, the one they were very confident would protect their money from people like me. They were so confident, in fact, that they moved fast. Lawyers, banks, divorce papers, like the outcome was already decided. They never once asked me what the contract actually said, and that was their mistake. Because in about 10 minutes, I'm going to show you how a family that thought money could erase a marriage learned, very publicly, that contracts don't care about class. Let me tell you how I ended up married into a family that viewed my existence as a temporary inconvenience. I met Sarah at a college bar 7 years ago. She was 23, I was 25. She was working toward her master's in communications while juggling a part-time boutique job. I was managing a sporting goods store and taking night classes to finish my business degree. We fell in love the ordinary way. Coffee dates, weekend trips, arguments about whose turn it was to pay for dinner. She laughed at my jokes. I helped her move apartments. We talked about the future like two people actually planning one. Her parents met me exactly once before deciding I wasn't worth their time. The dinner was at a downtown steakhouse where the cheapest entree cost more than I made in a day. Phil dominated the conversation with talk of property investments and tax shelters. Margaret smiled politely and asked pointed questions about my long-term trajectory. Sports retail, Phil repeated like I'd confessed to a bad habit. Interesting choice. Not career, choice. By dessert, I understood. A guy making $45,000 a year managing other people's athletic equipment was never going to qualify as permanent in their world of real estate portfolios and country club memberships. I was a phase their daughter would eventually outgrow. But Sarah didn't care. She moved in with me 6 months later into my one-bedroom apartment above a pizza shop. She said she loved how normal everything felt, how no one was measuring us. We split everything, rent, groceries, utilities. She paid what she could, I covered the rest. It felt like partnership, not charity. When I proposed 2 years later, Sarah said yes before I finished asking. Her parents said we needed to talk. The meeting was at Phil's law office, corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place designed to make normal people feel small. Phil laid a 47-page document across a polished desk. This is standard for families in our position, he said, just protection. The prenuptial agreement was dense and technical, but the message was clear. What Sarah brought into the marriage stayed hers. Anything inherited or gifted from family would never be mine. It's not personal, Margaret said in a tone that made it very clear it was. Phil didn't mince words. No signature, no wedding. So I signed because I loved Sarah, because I believed marriage mattered more than paper, because I assumed how we lived would matter more than what her parents thought. For 5 years, it did. We bought a house together, opened joint accounts, filed taxes together, paid bills together. I covered the mortgage when her freelance work slowed. She picked up groceries when I was between raises. We built a life the way normal people do, gradually, together. Her parents never warmed up to me. Holiday dinners placed me at the edge of the table. Family photos where I stood just outside the frame. But Sarah and I were solid, or so I thought. Right up until Tuesday night, when $9 million entered the conversation, and suddenly everything we'd built was negotiable. The lottery ticket that changed everything was bought on a Thursday evening during our weekly grocery run. $2, quick pick. Same gas station we always stopped at on the way home from the supermarket. Sarah was in the passenger seat, sorting through coupons while I pumped gas and grabbed the usual. Diet Coke for her, coffee for me, and a lottery ticket because why not? I used our joint debit card the same way I did for everything else. The receipt got stuffed into my wallet alongside the grocery receipt and the gas receipt, 3 small pieces of paper documenting a shared life. Sarah didn't even look up when I bought it. It was routine, background noise, the kind of decision married couples don't discuss because it's too small to matter. That $2 ticket came from our shared checking account. Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the sports section when Sarah's phone started ringing. "Oh my God," she said, staring at the screen. "Oh my God." The numbers matched. All of them. $9 million before taxes. The biggest jackpot our state had ever seen. I expected celebration, shock, laughter, planning. Instead, Sarah was already dialing her parents. "Mom, you need to call Dad. We need to talk, all of us, right now. Not we won, not we need to figure this out. Just them." By the time she hung up, she was pacing. "They're going to freak out," she said, not happily, not nervously, but like someone bracing for instructions. 2 hours later, there was a family meeting at her parents' house. I wasn't invited. "This is family business," Sarah said, grabbing her keys. "I'll be back later." Family business. A lottery ticket bought with joint money from a shared account was suddenly something I wasn't part of. I sat alone in our living room for 4 hours, waiting for my wife to come home and tell me how we were going to handle the best thing that had ever happened to us. When she finally walked through the door, she wasn't smiling. She was holding divorce papers. By Sunday morning, lawyers had been contacted, strategies discussed, and my removal from their future quietly scheduled. The transformation happened overnight. Sunday dinner, which had been a weekly tradition for 3 years, was suddenly canceled. "I have family only," Margaret said when I asked Sarah about it, as if 5 years of marriage had been revoked along with my invitation. It wasn't just dinner, the group chat went quiet. Photos got posted later. Wine glasses, candles, the dining room table I'd eaten at dozens of times, cropped carefully so I wasn't in the frame. I watched my life continue without me in real time, one filtered image at a time. My calls went to voicemail, text messages got read but not answered. When I tried to talk to Sarah about lawyers or next steps or what any of this meant, she'd find reasons to be somewhere else. "I need space to think," she kept saying, like thinking was something that required my physical absence. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 5 years started treating me like a stranger who'd overstayed his welcome. I went from son-in-law to liability in 48 hours. Monday morning, Phil called me directly. Not Sarah, not through a lawyer. Phil himself dialing my number at 7:30 in the morning while I was getting ready for work. "We need to discuss your situation," he said. "No greeting, no small talk. I think it's time you accepted reality." "What reality is that?" "The reality that you signed a prenuptial agreement 5 years ago. The reality that this windfall has nothing to do with you. The reality that fighting this will cost you more than you'll ever make in your little store." Little store. Like managing inventory, staff, payroll, and sales for a regional chain was a hobby. "The best attorneys money can buy are already on retainer," Phil continued. "Judges, mediators, firms, this is the world we operate in. You don't belong in it. You can drag this out if you want, but you'll lose. And when you do, you'll be responsible for everyone's legal fees." The message wasn't subtle. Fold now. Disappear quietly. Be grateful we're letting you walk away. Phil talked about that prenup like it guaranteed my destruction. But it wasn't just the legal intimidation that got to me. It was watching Sarah disappear. The woman who'd laughed at my jokes and split grocery bills and planned weekend trips started scheduling meetings with lawyers I'd never heard of. She opened new bank accounts without telling me. She stopped coming home until after I'd gone to bed. When she did talk to me, it was in the language her parents had taught her. Marital assets. Separate property. Financial obligations. Like our marriage had retroactively become a business mistake that needed unwinding. "This doesn't have to be ugly," she said one evening, standing in our kitchen like she was visiting someone else's house. "If you just accept what the prenup says, we can make this clean." Clean. 5 years of shared everything reduced to an exit strategy. The woman I married disappeared with those winning numbers. That night, I sat in our living room, my living room, according to the mortgage papers, and replayed every word Phil had said. He was counting on intimidation, on exhaustion, on me believing I was already beaten. I realized something important. Phil had been very confident about what the prenup meant. He'd never once asked if I'd actually read it. I wasn't going to be intimidated by his threats or guilt-tripped by Sarah's transformation or convinced that a document I'd signed under pressure meant I had no rights at all. I called a family law attorney and made an appointment for Friday morning. It was time to find out what that prenuptial agreement actually said, not what Phil wanted me to believe it said. Friday morning, I walked into Rebecca Chen's law office with a folder containing our prenuptial agreement, 5 years of bank statements, and a notebook full of questions. Rebecca was the kind of attorney I could afford. Small practice, reasonable rates, but sharp enough to handle complex family law. She'd come recommended by a friend who'd been through a messy divorce and won. "Tell me about the prenup," she said, settling behind her desk with reading glasses and a legal pad. I handed her the 47-page document, still in its original manila envelope. Her father wrote it. He's a corporate lawyer, very proud of how airtight it is. Rebecca spent 20 minutes reading, making notes, occasionally raising her eyebrows. I sat across from her, trying to read her expression, wondering if Phil had been right about everything. Finally, she looked up. "This is interesting," she said. "Very interesting." "What's interesting about it?" "Section 7.3, Rebecca said, flipping to a page covered in yellow highlighter marks. "The windfall clause." "The what?" Rebecca read directly from the document. "Any windfall gains obtained during the course of the marriage, including but not limited to lottery winnings, gambling proceeds, unexpected inheritance, or other unearned income, shall be considered marital assets subject to equitable distribution." I stared at her, reading the words again as she slid the page toward me. Lottery winnings, marital assets. For the first time since Tuesday night, the narrative Phil had been feeding me cracked. "What does that mean?" I asked, even though I already felt the answer forming. "It means your father-in-law accidentally gave you legal protection for exactly this situation." The room went quiet except for the traffic outside. I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief exactly, but clarity. He was trying to protect lottery winnings? "He was trying to protect everything," Rebecca said, "and in doing so, he wrote a clause that doesn't care who won the ticket, only when." Phil hadn't written a weapon. He'd written a rule. Rebecca continued, pointing out subsections, definitions, cross-references. The more she explained, the more obvious it became. Phil had outsmarted himself. "What about the bank records?" I asked, sliding the statements across her desk. Rebecca reviewed 5 years of joint account activity. Mortgage payments, grocery runs, utilities, insurance, no separation, no ambiguity. "This doesn't look like two people keeping finances apart," she said. "This looks like a married couple who fully integrated their lives." She tapped the statement from Thursday night. "And the ticket was purchased with marital funds from a joint account. That matters." Every transaction told the same story. Partnership. "Your father-in-law may have Harvard credentials," Rebecca said, "but this is a very expensive oversight." Over the next hour, she walked me through the strategy. File a motion, assert the windfall clause, attach bank records, force disclosure. "What are my chances?" I asked. "With this language and this paper trail, very good, 90%. For the first time all week, I exhaled. But Rebecca wasn't done. "When wealthy families realize they're about to lose money," she said carefully, "they don't always handle it well. Meaning, expect pressure, settlement offers, threats dressed up as concern." She was right. By Monday morning, Phil's tone had changed completely. Calls at 6 a.m. voicemails asking me to be reasonable. Sarah texting that maybe everyone had moved too fast. The same people who'd spent the weekend planning my removal were suddenly eager to slow things down. Phil's confidence collapsed the moment the prenup stopped being theoretical. And I knew this was only the beginning. Rebecca and I spent the next week building a case that would have made Phil proud if it hadn't been designed to dismantle him piece by piece. We didn't rush, we didn't assume anything. We treated every document like it would eventually be read out loud in a courtroom. We started with the prenuptial agreement. The same 47-page document Phil had slid across his desk 5 years earlier, confident enough to give me no time to review it properly and no choice but to sign. Rebecca laid it flat on her desk and worked through it line by line. She highlighted key phrases in yellow. She annotated margins in blue. She cross-referenced definitions in red. Nothing was skipped. Section 7.3 became the centerpiece. She read it slowly, out loud, exactly as it appeared on the page. "Any windfall gains obtained during the course of the marriage, including but not limited to lottery winnings, gambling proceeds, unexpected inheritance, or other unearned income, shall be considered marital assets subject to equitable distribution." She paused and looked at me. I looked back at the page. Lottery winnings, marital assets. Not potentially, not in certain circumstances, not unless otherwise specified. Just marital assets. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She flipped back to the definition section and pointed to another paragraph Phil had written himself. Marital assets include any property, income, or financial benefit acquired by either spouse during the marriage, regardless of which spouse's name appears on the title, account, or instrument. She tapped the page with her pen. Phil didn't leave himself any wiggle room, she said calmly. He wrote this to be airtight. Phil's own words legally guaranteed my claim. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was heavy. Not relief, not victory. Just the quiet realization that the story Phil had been telling me all week about how I was already beaten wasn't true. What was he trying to do here? I finally asked. Cover everything, Rebecca said. Corporate lawyers hate ambiguity. They write broadly so nothing slips through. She closed the document. And in doing that, he protected you. Next came the bank records. 5 years of statements stacked neatly in chronological order. Rebecca spread them across the table and let the pattern speak for itself. Every month looked the same. My paycheck deposited into our joint checking account. Bills paid from that same account. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, everything flowing from one shared source. There was no separation, no accounting tricks, no yours versus mine, just ours. Then she pointed to the Thursday night entry. Gas and Go station, $2. Debit card ending in 4,729. The same card we used for groceries. The same card we used for gas. The same card we used for everyday life. Our debit card, our joint account, our money. The ticket was purchased with marital funds, Rebecca said, writing notes. That matters more than who physically scratched it. She traced the financial integration backward. Joint tax returns filed every year, both names on the mortgage application, shared car insurance policies, health insurance through my employer, listing Sarah as my spouse. This doesn't look like two people keeping finances separate, she said. This looks like a marriage. That was when something clicked. Phil had been relying on intimidation. Rebecca was relying on math. And math doesn't care about tone or status. The most damaging evidence, though, didn't come from the prenup or the bank. It came from Phil himself. I'd saved everything. Every voicemail, every text, every attempt to scare me into compliance. Rebecca had me transcribe them word for word, date and time included. Monday morning, 7:32 a.m. The reality is, this will cost you more than you'll ever make in your little store. Tuesday afternoon. This could get very expensive for everyone. Think carefully about what's reasonable. Wednesday evening, Margaret's voicemail. We're not trying to be difficult, we just want you to understand your position. Rebecca read through them without comment. Then she looked up. This is intimidation, she said, and judges don't like it. Their threats, once meant to silence me, had turned into evidence of bad faith. The final layer was documentation of our shared life. 5 years reduced to paper, but the picture was unmistakable. Mortgage documents showing both our incomes, utility bills alternating between our names, credit cards listing me as the primary account holder, insurance policies naming each other as beneficiaries. Every document told the same story. This wasn't about opportunism. It wasn't about greed. It was about a real marriage, lived in real time with real financial interdependence. Rebecca organized everything into a single filing. Clean, methodical, impossible to dismiss. We're ready, she said. And for the first time since Tuesday night, I didn't feel like someone trying to survive a threat. I felt like someone holding facts. Ink, paper, signatures. Phil's signature. This wasn't a gamble anymore. It was arithmetic. The next step was filing our motion with the family court, and Rebecca made sure I understood exactly what that meant. Once we submit these documents, everything becomes public record, she said, organizing our evidence into manila folders. Court filings, financial disclosures, transcripts. Anyone can walk into the courthouse and read about this case. I thought about Phil's reputation, his law practice, his country club standing. A public divorce proceeding where his own prenuptial agreement backfired wouldn't exactly enhance his image. Yeah, that's not my problem, I said. No, Rebecca replied, but it is leverage. Wealthy families hate public embarrassment more than they hate losing money. She was right. Within 24 hours of filing, Phil's entire tone changed. Family court meant their dirty laundry wouldn't stay private. The settlement offers started immediately. First, Sarah called at 6 in the morning. Maybe we moved too fast, she said, her voice small and tired. Maybe we should slow down and really think about this. Then Margaret leaving voicemails about family healing and finding a path forward that works for everyone. Finally, Phil himself, no longer threatening, now negotiating. "We're prepared to offer a reasonable settlement," he said during a tense phone call, "something that acknowledges your contribution to the marriage." Contribution, like 5 years of mortgage payments, shared bills, and joint debt were some kind of favor I'd done them. "What kind of settlement?" I asked. "500,000, Phil said. "Cash. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, we avoid court, and everyone moves on quietly." $500,000 was more money than I'd ever had in my life. It was also roughly 1/18 of what I was legally entitled to. "I'll think about it," I said. I didn't need to. Every offer they made only confirmed one thing. They knew they were losing. But the money wasn't the only pressure. Rebecca warned me what was coming next. "They're going to try to bury us," she said. "Depositions, endless document requests, expert witnesses, delay tactics. Their attorneys bill more per hour than you make in a month." "Can we handle it?" I asked. "We can," she said, "because we're right, but it won't be easy." I looked again at the evidence spread across the table. The prenuptial agreement, the bank records, the threatening voicemails. They brought an army of lawyers. I brought the truth. The week before our court date, Rebecca and I met one final time. She walked me through courtroom procedure, where I'd sit, when I'd speak, when I wouldn't. She reminded me to stay calm, answer only what was asked, and let the documents do the heavy lifting. "Phil will be there," she said. "So will Sarah, and her mother. This is going to be emotional." I nodded. I also understood what this fight was going to cost me. Not just money, time, energy, focus. Court dates meant time off work. Depositions meant reliving conversations I wanted buried. Once this became public record, there would be no putting the story back in the box. People would have opinions. Some would say I was greedy. Some would say I should have taken the settlement and been grateful. Some would say a guy like me should know when to walk away quietly. Phil was counting on that shame. He was counting on me wanting peace more than fairness, on me wanting silence more than truth. But peace that comes from surrender isn't peace. It's silence. And I'd spent enough years being silent in rooms where I was never meant to belong. If this was going to be decided, it would be decided in open court, with contracts, signatures, and facts that didn't care who my father-in-law was. I looked up at Rebecca. "So, I'm ready," I said. And I was. The prenuptial agreement that was supposed to protect their wealth was about to cost them half of the largest lottery jackpot in state history. I was ready to let Phil's own words destroy him. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but formal in the way that mattered most. Wood-paneled walls, an elevated judge's bench, fluorescent lighting that made everything look serious and unavoidable. This wasn't a place for intimidation, it was a place for facts. I arrived 15 minutes early with Rebecca, carrying a single folder containing copies of everything we needed. We sat at the plaintiff's table exactly as rehearsed, documents stacked in the order they would be presented. Phil's entrance was a performance. He swept through the double doors flanked by 3 attorneys from the most expensive family law firm in the state, their combined hourly rates probably exceeding my annual salary. His suit was tailored, pressed, unmistakably expensive, the same one I'd seen him wear to charity galas and country club dinners. Sarah and Margaret followed behind him, taking seats in the front row like they were attending a show they'd already paid for. Phil greeted the bailiff by name, adjusted his cufflinks, set his briefcase down with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a legal argument that mattered to him personally. He looked at me once. Not with anger, with certainty. The look said this would be over soon, and I would finally learn my place. At exactly 9 o'clock, Judge Harrison took the bench. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with the practiced calm of someone who had no patience for legal theatrics. "This is a motion regarding marital asset distribution following lottery winnings," she said, scanning the file. "I've reviewed the briefs. Let's begin with the prenuptial agreement." Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, we direct the court to Section 7.3 of the prenuptial agreement, drafted personally by respondent's father, who is present in the courtroom." The clerk handed the document to the judge. The room went quiet. Judge Harrison took her time, turning pages, reading carefully, no rush, no drama. Phil's legal team sat motionless, but I could see it, the tension in their shoulders, the subtle shifting. They knew exactly what clause she was about to read. Then the judge spoke. "Any windfall gains obtained during the course of the marriage, including but not limited to lottery winnings, gambling proceeds, unexpected inheritance, or other unearned income, shall be considered marital assets subject to equitable distribution. The silence afterward felt physical. Phil's face changed in stages: confusion, then recognition, then something close to nausea. His attorneys leaned in, whispering urgently, but it sounded like triage, not strategy. Margaret clutched Sarah's arm. Sarah stared at the floor, frozen. Rebecca continued. The lottery ticket was purchased with funds from the couple's joint checking account, as demonstrated by 5 years of banking records showing complete financial integration. She submitted the statements. Joint accounts, joint mortgage, joint insurance, joint taxes. A marriage in every way that mattered. Judge Harrison reviewed the documents, cross-referencing dates and account numbers. Then she looked up. "Mr. Phil," she said evenly, "did you personally draft this agreement?" Phil stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. And does Section 7.3, as written, classify lottery winnings as marital assets? For the first time, Phil looked to his own attorneys for help. They didn't have any. Yes, he said quietly. Judge Harrison placed the documents down. The language is unambiguous. The funds were marital, the ticket was purchased with marital assets. Under the prenuptial agreement drafted by Respondent's Counsel, the winnings are marital property. She paused, letting the words settle, not just in the room, but on the record. Motion granted. The lottery winnings will be treated as marital assets subject to equitable distribution. We will reconvene Monday to finalize division, but preliminary calculation indicates an approximately equal split after taxes and fees. $4.5 million. Phil collapsed into his chair. Not dramatically, just empty, like something essential had drained out of him. Margaret made a sound that might have been a sob. Sarah didn't move at all. I stayed seated, hands folded, breathing steady. There was no urge to smile, no satisfaction in watching them break. Just clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was math. Contracts, signatures. The court reporter typed every word, the clause, the admission, the ruling, locking it into public record forever. The prenuptial agreement meant to keep me out had just ensured I stayed in. As the judge exited, Phil didn't look at me. He couldn't, because this hadn't been decided by emotion or class or power. It had been decided by his own words, written years ago, signed confidently, and finally read aloud where they couldn't be rewritten. 3 weeks later, I walked out of the bank with a cashier's check for $4.5 million. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves if I blinked. Not because I didn't believe it, but because this piece of paper represented the end of something that had controlled my life for years. Not just the marriage, the constant proving, the quiet calculations about what I was worth in rooms where money decided everything. The final settlement was exactly what Judge Harrison predicted. 50% of the winnings after taxes and legal fees. Phil's team made one last desperate motion to reduce the amount, citing extraordinary circumstances, but the judge shut it down in less than 5 minutes. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad, just like Phil had always said. It just wasn't protecting who he thought it was protecting. Rebecca's bill was reasonable, especially considering what she'd accomplished. Phil's legal fees, on the other hand, probably cost his family another $250,000. Expensive lawyers charging premium rates to lose a case their client had already decided with his own contract language. $4.5 million bought me freedom from their control forever. I bought a house 6 months later. Nothing flashy, just a 3-bedroom place in a neighborhood where nobody cared about my background or felt the need to remind me where I came from. A place where the mortgage was mine, the decisions were mine, and dinner invitations came without conditions or judgments. Sarah signed the final divorce papers without contest. We haven't spoken since the court date. I heard through mutual friends that she moved back in with her parents, that Phil's law practice took a hit when word spread about the case, that Margaret stopped hosting dinner parties for a while. I don't wish them ill, but I don't miss them either. The job at the sporting goods store became a choice instead of a necessity. I kept working because I liked it, not because I had to. When the owner decided to sell, I bought the location and turned it into my own business. The same job Phil once called my little store now belonged to me completely. The irony didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance. The prenuptial agreement meant to trap me hadn't just secured my money, it freed me from a life where I was always being measured and always found lacking by people who never bothered to know me. And that freedom was worth far more than the check in my hand.